Dr. Torrie Thompson, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Well, thank you. We're excited to have you too. And I know our community is going to be really excited, those who are listening to us. And we have actually been putting these up on YouTube recently, which is really an interesting and different approach for Tick Boot Camp. But for those folks who are most of the people who will be listening and downloading to this podcast, who are only hearing it orally, I know they'll be excited to know that I have Cassidy Colbert as my guest co-host. So Cassidy, say hi to the folks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you for being back. So, Dr. Thompson, first, why don't you share with us where you're calling in from?
I am in lovely Austin, Texas.
All right. And we've had a lot of folks from Texas lately, although we're led to believe that folks in Texas don't believe there's such thing as Lyme disease. In fact, I think iLads decided to come down to Texas because of the folks in Texas establishing an official policy that there is no Lyme disease in Texas. So help us out with this. What is a Lyme doc doing in Texas?
Well, I'm the California transplant. So I'm one of many that have left California, moved from the Bay Area to Austin, Texas. And yeah, you do have a lot of kind of old school thinkers here where no, these ticks don't have Lyme. It's a very interesting thing to hear.
Well, you know, the CEO of iLads is a real badass. I mean, she's just really someone who will like challenge anyone and everyone about Lyme disease. And she shared with us about 6 months ago that they decided to hold their annual international conference in Texas. She just wants to make sure there's a splash, and you folks in Texas know that there's Lyme disease and they're coming down. They're right in Texas. And I actually can share with you folks something interesting. We've been invited, we at Tick Boot Camp have been invited to actually conduct podcasts for all of the folks at iLads. So after they give their presentation, we're going to be interviewing them and putting these videos up and putting the audio up on our various platforms. So we're really excited to come down to Texas. We'll be down in your neck of the woods in, I think, another week and a half or 2 weeks. So,
Okay.
So if you're going to the iLads conference, Dr. Thompson, I'll see you down there.
See you there.
All right. So now that we know where you are from, or you're living now, and you were a California gal, so give us a little bit. I can speak today, folks. I promise. A little bit about your background. What was it like to grow up in California? And talk to us about what your dreams and goals were prior to becoming a doctor.
Yeah, so I grew up in California, very, very active. I started playing tennis very young and played junior tennis. So basically like the prep to go to professional tennis, was a ranked junior tennis player, and also was a equestrian. I showed horses. And so I was very, very active. This is my prior to Lyme disease story, very, very active, and had dreams of being a professional tennis player. Either that or I want to be a vet. You know, every kid has that I want to be a vet and help animals dream as well. But really wanting to push and pursue professional tennis. And it wasn't really until my Lyme journey myself that I decided that I was going to figure out my own health issues. And by doing that, that was how I was going to go get my doctorate and figure it out myself so I could help others.
All right. So you had dreams of becoming a professional athlete, and you were working towards that and seemingly having success, right? You were on the juniors tour. So let's talk about the equestrian piece of it, though. Because I'm sure they both come together. We've had many folks on this podcast who are equestrian athletes or equestrian enthusiasts, not always necessarily competitive equestrian athletes, and they found themselves sick from Lyme disease, right? And we know that horses, of course, are one of the places where you're likely to come in contact with ticks. They're large animals and they pick up a lot of ticks, especially if you're going out on trails with the horses. So talk to us about your equestrian activities and whether or not any of the training that you had as an equestrian athlete included training about how to protect yourself from Lyme disease.
So I was more in the showing realm. And so in that world, nobody talks about it. They're concerned with West Nile for the horses because they can't travel if they have West Nile. But Lyme disease is never spoken about. And what's interesting is back when I was younger, Lyme disease was a non-existent disease in California by medical standard. So even if you went to the doctor, had symptoms of it, it didn't exist by, what they would say, it didn't exist in California. So it isn't tested for, it wasn't talked about. Nobody really ever spoke about it. So it was never on the forefront of my mind, being around horses, and then our house backed up to nature preserves. And so we had no idea the potential risk that we had between the animals and our house of ticks, and being, you get bit as kids and you don't think anything of it. But being in California back then just wasn't on anyone's mind.
So do you recall being bitten by ticks during your childhood?
I do recall being bit. One time I caught a little tick on me and got it off really fast, but the tick bite that made me sick, I have no idea. I don't know where I got bit. Our dog had Lyme disease, and what was interesting is when the dog got Lyme disease, his symptoms were almost immediate. He couldn't walk, couldn't move, and the vet knew immediately that he had Lyme disease. Treated him with antibiotics and all was well, but it was never like, hey, you guys should test yourselves to see if you guys have it. Like, wasn't spoken about again. And so we just really were, I don't want to say ignorant, we just didn't know any better about what the potential risk was, because you just heard, oh, it's, an East Coast thing. That's what they kept saying. It's East Coast thing. Don't worry about it.
Well, you don't have to worry about that anyway, because even if you were living on the East Coast, you wouldn't have had a lot of information about Lyme anyway. So even though you folks on the left coast can point to us and call it an East Coast disease, we received no education either. And I'm very happy to use the term ignorant. We were ignorant because the educational system has failed us, and it had failed us on so many different levels, but they certainly failed us in not putting us in a position where we knew how and know how to protect ourselves from Lyme disease. And even my children, generation younger than me, who are all very accomplished young people, until I started to study Lyme disease, they knew nothing about it either, right? So this is not a part of the health curriculum. It's not a part of the science curriculum. It's not a part of any of the educational courses that are provided even here on the East Coast, right? So it does not surprise me that it's not happening on the West Coast. And of course, you don't have Lyme disease in Texas, so there wouldn't be any educational courses on these diseases either. So how was your health as a young person? Were you a healthy young person? Did you have some health challenges? What was it like during your youth?
I was like the pinnacle of health. Never got sick, was a very, very healthy kid. I mean, I think really over the course of my childhood, maybe had the flu one time. I was really the pinnacle of health. We never were sick. And then, as I got older, it wasn't until like I hit a wall with all of a sudden started noticing things. But even through then, I never got sick. And even like through my Lyme journey was still very healthy by the standard of not having colds or flus or anything, but had a lot of other symptoms. But I was truly very healthy as a child. We had a very bad diet. We had a standard American diet. So my mom would cook a lot, but it wasn't anything healthy. So we were kind of set up to fail from a nutritional standpoint. We didn't eat great, but sickness wise and health wise, my whole family was very healthy.
Okay, so you now foreshadowed the wall. So help us with that. When did you hit the wall? How old were you and where were you?
I was about 12 to 13 years old, and it started very strange for me. I'm a tennis player, and so all of a sudden I would just not be able to lift my arms up, and I couldn't serve a tennis ball. And being a very high level tennis player, that was very strange. There was no injuries, there was nothing to warrant that. And then would get these headaches, and then my energy tanked, but it would come and it would go. And so I was able to push through and still keep doing things. And, it didn't make sense to doctors because they were like, well, if there's something really wrong with you, it would stay. You would have these symptoms all the time. Then it progressed to gaining weight. And I was super puffy. And I was still playing a lot of tennis. I was very active and it didn't make sense. Why was I gaining weight? Then it really manifested neurologically. Couldn't remember words. All of a sudden I would be like, I couldn't remember the word for dog or something simple but then, an hour later, I'd be totally fine. And so I had these ebb and flow of symptoms that just was strange. So we went everywhere. My parents took me to every specialist. We saw neurologists, endocrinologists, cancer specialists. We went everywhere and no one could figure out what was wrong. They ran, we did CTs, MRIs. They were looking for everything. I had one doctor and he was like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I think you have a brain tumor that's not showing up in imaging. Let's just do exploratory brain surgery. And luckily my parents were like, no, that doesn't sound good. So they didn't do that. I had them willing to put me on metformin and various medications, but they couldn't tell me why. And so we just kept going. And my mom is a saint. We'd go to another doctor and we'd go to another doctor. We'd go to another doctor. And it was just always like, I remember crying in the car after pretty much every appointment because something's wrong, but they're like, nope. Then it got to the point where I know so many Lyme people can relate to this when they say that, it's just all in your head. There's nothing really wrong with you. It's just you need to go see a psychiatrist because you're just manifesting this. Maybe it's too much stress from tennis. You're just manifesting these symptoms. And so we looked for answers for 10 to 12 years. We got nowhere. And so it was just really for me an extremely long journey, and the symptoms just kept getting worse and worse and worse to the point I was like, I was miserable. I didn't want to live anymore because I was like, if this is what the rest of my life looks like, I have no desire to be here for this.
Okay. So let's talk about first the migrating symptoms, right? It is a very typical experience for someone with Lyme disease to have migrating symptoms. In fact, it's one of the reasons why doctors will argue to you that it's in your head rather than in your body, which, by the way, it is always in your head. It's just bugs in your brain, right? But we'll get there in a minute. But because we have migrating symptoms when we're dealing with Lyme disease, many doctors will tell us, hey, there's nothing wrong with you because you're coming back with a pain in this part of your body, and then that pain is going away and you're coming back with a pain in another part of your body. And for whatever reason, I know people in the Lyme community would say, well, that sounds Limey, right? But unfortunately, doctors in the medical community don't see it that way. They see it as psychosomatic. And because they think it's psychosomatic, they start to gaslight you and suggest to you that there's nothing wrong with you or that it's emotional. Now, there's a corollary to that, and that is, in many cases, when doctors are telling us there's nothing wrong with us physically, because either the diagnostic testing is not giving them that information, or because we have these migrating symptoms, in many cases, our parents begin to disbelieve us as well. Was that a problem for you? Did your parents question whether or not you were physically ill because the doctors are saying they couldn't find something wrong with you?
Luckily, no. I think my dad maybe a little bit, but he wasn't really. It was my mom taking me to all my doctor's appointments. And so my mom, she stood behind me and she would argue with the doctors, and she was like my biggest advocate. And so I'm so blessed that I had her, that she believed me, because I had one person on my side that I knew, okay, you might tell me I'm crazy, but I know my mom knows that I'm not, and we're just going to go to somebody else until we find the right solution.
Let's talk about the doctor carousel that we have labeled here at Tick Boot Camp, where you're just going from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor, right? And that creates another problem from a diagnostic standpoint, right? And I think the nature of having a system of specialists rather than generalists causes us to go from one doctor to another, and they all look at us through a very limited prism, right? Every cardiologist is going to find a heart problem, and every nephrologist is going to find a kidney problem, and every rheumatologist is going to find the problems with arthritis, right, or some autoimmune issue, right? So we have this system of specialists who are always looking through a very limited prism, and they have problems with diagnosing us when we have these migrating symptoms. And symptoms that are not necessarily within their box. So talk to us about what that experience was like, of course, before you became a doctor yourself, what that experience was like from going from specialist to specialist, and how your migrating symptoms undermine your ability to get a diagnosis from the specialist.
I think the trickiest part is that my labs always came back quote unquote normal by their standard. So I would go to specialists and they would say there's nothing wrong with you. you're great. Your thyroid looks great. Your brain looks great. Your kidneys look great. And so I was luckily, like, I'm a very analytical person. So I'm like, okay, they don't see it. So we'll just keep going. We'll just keep going. But the standard ranges, as we know, are so huge that, you could be 0.01 in the range and you're still quote unquote good. And so all of my labs were coming back normal. And so, okay, we're just going to pack up and we're going to take those labs to the next one and the next one and the next one. And so it was a journey. And you get very hard, tough skin through it because you have them say ridiculous things along the way and you just kind of have to learn to brush it off. And I remember getting in the car several times and my mom just saying, ignore what they said. They're just ignorant. They don't understand. We'll find answers for you. And so she helped keep me, I think, dialed in on like, yes, there's something wrong. Cause I think after a while, you would start to believe it, right? You would start to see like, oh no, okay, this is in my head. There's nothing wrong with me when you have these experts telling you that. So luckily, my mom has been like the hero of the journey the whole way of just, no, there's something wrong. We're going to find it. It's just we haven't found the right person to find it over and over and over.
So give us some examples of some of the ridiculous things doctors have said to you after you went to see them for a diagnosis for your health problem.
I had one doctor that told me that I was wasting her time. We were paying. This was a cash practice. I was wasting her time by telling her my sob story looking for attention. That was one that we got. The brain tumor one, I'm willing to do brain surgery, but I can't find it. That one was pretty wild. We had several that were just, you're crazy. One guy told me I need to be in the loony bin. And my mom like grabbed my hand and we walked out. Because I was a teenager at the time. I wasn't very old. So it was crazy they would say these things. One guy along the lines of a loony bin said that, if you keep thinking you're this sick, you're never going to get well. So it's just they say these things to you, and I don't think they realize the impact that it can have on someone of what it does to their mental health when they're already not feeling great. You don't want to be there. And then they say that you start, going down some dark spirals.
So talk to us about what it was like for you socially while you're going through this journey and you're not feeling well. Were you able to go to school? Were you able to have social relationships with your friends? What was that part of your life like during your pre-diagnosis journey?
I kept it from everyone. Nobody knew that I was going through it. Not even extended family. We kept it very, very private. And I'm not exactly sure why we did that. It just didn't seem right. I think because we didn't have any answers. So I faked a lot. I would pretend like everything was great and, I just faked it. And there was years of my life that I would fake it. And so I would really selectively agree to things with friends that I knew that I could rest before, or I could, go for a little bit and then go home. And so I got very good at navigating my schedule to set myself up for success so that nobody knew anything was wrong. And people always just thought I was kind of like a weird, like distant person that I just didn't really want to like be super involved, but it was just really, I didn't have the energy for it and I didn't feel great. So I was very private. It really wasn't until I got through my journey that I actually ever spoke about it. It was kept very close to us. But I got very good at hiding it and keeping it under wraps and just very good at scheduling. I had to stop playing high level tennis. It wasn't possible for me to keep doing that. I felt like I was hurting my body more than I was helping it. And so when that happened, I just said, I'm just over it. I'm burnt out, and just kind of always blamed it on the burnout. I was too much, too young. I'm just burnt out, and hid it extremely well.
And that may have been true, right? I mean, one of the things that we know about people who are engaging in extreme fitness activities will have lower T cell counts, and that will be immunosuppressive, and it's more likely that you're going to get sick. So even though that was the social excuse we were using, it was probably true, right? It probably was true. So let's talk about one more thing before Cassidy takes you through the diagnostic journey. When did you finally get diagnosed?
Oh God, it was 12 or 13 years after I started having symptoms.
So how old are you?
If
were
that.
in your mid-20s at the time?
Mid-20s, yeah.
Okay. Now, between the time that you first had your symptoms when you were 12, 13, until the time that you were diagnosed, which I'm assuming is in your 24, 25-year-old range, had anybody mentioned Lyme disease to you?
We even mentioned it to a few doctors and we were laughed out of the office. They were like, there is no way you contracted Lyme disease unless you've been to the East Coast and you didn't tell us. There's no way that you contracted Lyme disease in California. And, you know, a doctor says that to you and you're like, okay, well, I guess we can rule that out. But yeah, nobody mentioned it. Even when we had the dog that had Lyme disease, we even brought it up and they were like, nope, that was probably a false diagnosis on the dog.
Okay. So was it your experience as someone who had an animal companion with Lyme disease that caused you to ask about Lyme disease, or were there things that you were coming across during your research or your mom's research?
Yeah.
Or yeah, what was
Oh yeah, Dr.
bring
Google,
up Lyme?
right? You're Googling all these weird symptoms and Lyme disease comes up. And so you're like, okay, that kind of fits the bill. I don't remember a tick bite, but this kind of fits the bill of some of the weird neurological stuff and the weight gain. And so it was, you know, Dr. Google, which has a bad rap, but I think sometimes it does. It helps. It brings your attention to things that you have no idea about.
Okay. So now, of course, a tick bite is one of the ways that you can contract Lyme disease, but of course, you could have also contracted Lyme disease congenitally. Your mom might have had Lyme disease. You could have contracted Lyme disease through a blood transfusion if that was something that was ever a part of your journey, or you could have Lyme disease as a result of sexual contact with somebody who is infected. When you were talking with your doctors about Lyme disease, were they asking you about any of those other potential vehicles for you contracting Lyme disease? Were they examining your mom to see if she had similar symptoms? Was any of that a part of the conversation?
No, not at all. And I did have a blood transfusion as a child. Around 8 years old, I got my finger cut off in a horse accident. And so I had to have a blood transfusion. And that was always brought up in the history of what was possibly in that blood, because you're just thankful to get blood when you need it, but you
For
have no
sure.
idea what's in it. And they're not screening for Lyme in most of it. So were you given blood that had something in it? You have no idea. And they were like, no, they screen blood. There's nothing to worry about. If you got blood in a transfusion, it is clean. And then you believe it.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is keeping the illness private. And one of the reasons why I want to talk with you about that is more people on this podcast than not were diagnosed with their Lyme disease in the community. In fact, Phyllis Bedford from the Lyme Life Foundation calls Lyme disease the supermarket disease, where you're more likely to be diagnosed in the supermarket than you are in the doctor's office, right? In retrospect, you think it may have been better for you to be less private about this, so that if you were, you know, either at church or at school or, you know, in the community, letting people know that you had these symptoms, that you may have had an earlier diagnosis, because like Dr. Google, Dr. Supermarket seems to be the better place to begin to focus on these symptoms.
It's hard to know. I think it was, you know, this was a long time ago and, you know, there wasn't a lot of information on Lyme at the time. I think hindsight 2020, I think I'm now very open about my journey and very open, because I think if I can help anyone get through what I went through, that's my purpose. So I would, you know, I don't know it would have helped me because I don't know anyone that had Lyme, you know, where I was from at the
But you don't know,
time, but you never
know what you
know.
don't know, right? You don't know what you don't
Yeah.
know, and you don't know who you're going to
Yeah.
come in contact, right? Right. So I mean, look, we on this podcast strongly urge folks who think they may have Lyme disease or know someone who seems to be symptomatic to talk about it, right? And to talk about it in their communities, because you will have some resources sent to you and available to you that you don't know about if you don't talk about it, right? And it's another place where we encourage folks to reach out to people like Cassidy, right? Because I can tell you, if you have Lyme disease and you tell your symptoms to Cassidy, she's going to know you have Lyme disease, right? Because she's been through it all, right? And no one knows about Lyme disease more than folks who've been on the journey, right? I mean, we do have the capacity to help one another, and we certainly want to encourage folks to be more public about their symptoms when they're feeling them, so that you may be blessed with a diagnosis that a doctor either is not willing to give to you or doesn't have the ability to give to you for various reasons. I want to talk about that one more piece with you before Cassidy takes you through the diagnostic journey. And that is, now that you're a doctor, do you have some sympathy for the doctors who were struggling with giving you a diagnosis? Because we do know that there are some built-in incentives for doctors not to diagnose you with Lyme disease. For example, if you're a doctor who diagnoses people with Lyme disease, you're likely to have an insurance company complain to a licensing board. If you are someone who's diagnosing people with Lyme disease regularly, it's likely that the licensing boards will be on you and will at the very least make an inquiry, and in many cases they will hold hold a hearing to determine whether or not you should keep your license. So I'm going to ask you to now put your doctor's hat on. Not that you ever took it off, but we were talking to you during your childhood. Do you have some sympathy for medical professionals who are hesitant to diagnose somebody with Lyme disease because of the systemic incentives not to do it?
I think there's two answers to that. So I
Okay.
think there's the handcuffs that everyone lives in, and those are very real. And you work so hard to get your license, and you work your whole life to, do what you do. And so there's the handcuffs that you're in, and you have to respect those. You have to be willing to, go, okay, if someone doesn't want to risk their license, that's their choice. I also think there's the perspective, and this is more so what I tell the people I work with, is many doctors, they don't know what they don't know. And Lyme disease is not taught in school. It's downplayed. It's not ever, like, the reality of it is not taught. And so for them, their perspective is valid because nobody's taught it. They were never given proper education on it. And then the testing sucks. So it's not like you have, a really awesome test that could help them. And so their perspective is like, they don't know what they don't know. And sometimes I think you've got to just kind of give them a break because there's, they weren't taught it.
Right, and there's another. I mean, I'm gonna add on, and maybe this is a 2A or a 3, and that is that Lyme disease is not easy to diagnose, right? It
No,
is
it's
a
tricky.
very difficult disease to diagnose, especially when you're trained one bug, one disease, right?
Yep.
And we know that because this is a polymicrobial infection and because it's multisystemic, it's not easy to diagnose. Even under the best of circumstances, even with the bravest of doctors, even with the smartest of people, it's a difficult disease to diagnose, regardless of the circumstances. So, Cassidy, it's your turn to take Dr. Thompson through the diagnostic journey.
Why, thank you. There have been so many similarities. I don't know if you've seen me nodding along and saying yes that I have heard, but one I have to shout out is very similar situation with my mom is also the one, because I was the same age as you were when you started your journey, that got me to where we are. And we love moms here because they are the ones that fight for us often when we cannot. And
Yep.
similarly to what you both were just talking about, there have been so many occasions when I have been the one educating the doctor that I will go and see a doctor, and then I always weigh the options if I walk into a doctor's office. Am I going to mention Lyme or am I not? I suss out their vibes. I'm like, okay, probably not with this guy because I think he'll just be mean to me and say bad things that are going to bring up trauma. Or like I had a doctor last week that I went to, and I was the whole time before like really anxious about it. She seemed really nice. I brought up Lyme, and I was shocked to know that she knew things about Lyme. And then I told her more things about Lyme. So like educating her, because she doesn't learn about that in her textbooks or in her college classes either. So like that part of the journey. But I'm curious with how you actually got the official diagnosis and who was the one that gave it to you. You don't have to say a name if you don't want to, but like what kind of doctor?
Well, so this is another Dr. Google story. So I had, like everyone, a stack of Lyme or of labs, huge stack of lab testing. And I'd gone to a doctor, and she ran all these tests, and she was like, she thought she was going to put it together. And so I'd come home, and I'd just done a lab review with her, and she was like, I don't know what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you on paper. We thought it was this hormone problem. It's not. It's just, there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is. So I don't know what switched in my head. I was in school getting my doctorate at the time, and I sat down with a textbook, a medical textbook, got my computer out, and I went through every single lab that I'd ever done. And I Googled if it were out of range, what it was, what that could be. And I started this crazy list. And if you can imagine, you start Googling all these weird things, you're going to get some crazy possibilities. And so I started Googling and I had this list. And then she ran this hormone doctor. It was completely on accident. And it was just like a God sent thing. She had run a CDC 57 test on accident, didn't mean to add it. And that came back completely tanked. I think my number was like 2 or 3, bottomed out. And so I was like, okay, that's a weird test. I don't know what that is. I haven't seen that before. So Lyme disease had come up a few times in some of the things. And then the CDC 57, the CD57 test came up, and I was like, oh my God, it's either HIV or Lyme disease. We can probably rule out AIDS and HIV, but we'll go down that avenue, and then Lyme disease. And so I, at the time, asked her, I said, can you run a Lyme test? And she was like, nope, won't touch it. So I sought out a Lyme specialist, and I said, I think I have Lyme disease. I don't know, but I think I have a Lyme disease. Can you please run this test? And just so I can rule it in or out, it's been this, 15-year journey at this point. And she did. And we ran an IGeneX test, and sure enough, came back with lit up like a Christmas tree. We had, every infection that you could possibly have. And so it was really like Dr. Google, a textbook, and just sitting down and being like, I'm going to figure this out. And then asking for going to a Lyme specialist, and she ran the test for me.
That is a story we often hear in IGeneX. That's where I first got my official diagnosis as well, lit up as that Christmas tree, like you said. And then was the first treatment that you then went into when you were like, okay, I have Lyme. Now at least you have. And like, what did it feel like to have the official diagnosis of something after that long of a journey?
I will say I was relieved, but then I was very much trained in the like, you have something, then you can fix it, right? We can do something and then it's gone. And when I saw that, no, this isn't going to be something that it goes away, I think went into what many people do, is you get in that depressive spiral of like, oh gosh, I'm going to live with this for the rest of my life. What is my life going to look like? Am I going to be, you start reading blogs and you start seeing people that they never get better. And I went down that rabbit hole. And then my mom sat me down and she said, no, you're going to figure this out. You're going to get better. Now you know what it is. We'll just explore all the avenues. And so I asked this doctor, I said, what are my options naturally? I want to go as gentle as possible. Is that an option? And she said, yes, it is. I don't like doing that. But if you are set on going the natural route, then we can try it. She said, with how long you've been sick, I don't even know that antibiotics are your best course. So let's give it a go. And so with her, I started all the natural stuff. I then went to a doctor in Idaho that did some of he does work with magnets. And that kind of turned the corner for me. I did probably 90% of it with herbs. My diet, I got my diet dialed in. I changed everything in my lifestyle. Got extremely clean with my diet. We got rid of every toxic product. We just did a 180, and then, did about most of it with herbs, and then did the last little bit with the magnet work that if you would have told me earlier in my life I was going to do that, I would not have believed you. But that really did move the needle for me for, getting me over the first hump that I had to get over.
I think a lot of people on the Lyme journey, there's things that we try that you're like, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I would be doing this, my answer would have been hell no. And now it's a hell yeah, because that's
Yep.
So I'm curious, because you said you were getting your doctorate all at this time too. Were you leaning more towards like Western medicine when you were doing your journey, and then doing all this stuff switched more to being the holistic approach you have now? Or was it always, I'm going to do
I
that?
had switched earlier, so I'd always wanted to go traditional medicine, wanted to be a surgeon. My whole, like, that was what I was like, I'm going to be a surgeon. I don't know why, but I was like, I'm going to do surgery. I was doing while I was still very sick, I went over to Thailand and I was doing a surgical internship over there just to get hours before going to school. And they do surgery very different over there. And I was talking to one of the neurosurgeons, and he was like, you want to go traditional traditional medicine, but you don't believe in pharmaceuticals, you're crazy. He was like, you are never going to survive in it. Like, you need to go the natural route. And it never dawned on me that I was very much like holistic minded. And so, he did open my eyes, and he was like, there is a world where holistic stuff works. He was like, you're in Asia, like study it while you're here. And he was like, here in Thailand, we use herbal remedies first. The first line of defense for anything is herbal. Then if it goes beyond that, then of course we'll do surgery and all that, and or medications, but it's always herbal first. And it like clicked, and I was like, oh, this stuff does work. Like, we're just so trained in medicine, and you have something, it's take this pill, and it'll mask your symptoms. And that switched me over to going more in the holistic route. So it really did spark, like, when I was like, okay, we're going to treat myself, I wanted to go holistic because I was like, I know this can work. We got to figure out how.
I want to get more into your doctor journey, but I want to ask before we move on, kind of wrapping up, if you can, your Lyme journey. So how long of the treatment process did it take for you until you started to feel better? And what did better look like for you after being sick for so long?
I would say, so overall, it took me really 2 years to get back to 80%. But I would say within the first 6 months, the inflammation came down, the brain fog lifted a little bit, and it was just like I would get a little glimmer of light that would push me forward. And it was like, okay, we're getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. The neurological stuff really stopped. I did have really bad herxes, and as many people do, so there's definitely very down days, and I struggled a lot with a lot of like pain in my herxes, which I didn't have day to day. But I would say it was about 2.5 years for me really to get, and I would say it put me about 80% to where I felt like I was back to where I was prior to this.
Yeah. When you talk about your herxes, can you describe? I'm always interested in what others' herxes are like, because my one thing I found with Lyme people is no Lyme patient is the same. Everyone's journey, like, they all have various like similarities, but everyone has some differences within them. And I'm always interested to see what your herxes are like, because they're always a crazy ride.
Mine, they really are. And when I was there I remember being like, a herx, what the heck is that? And then I took my first dose, and I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. So I really struggled mentally with them. I would go immediately into a very deep depression. And so that was one of my biggest battles, was the mental piece of it, was being able to go but not push it, where I wasn't just like on this either totally like spacey or just super depressed. And then it felt like I had knives in my bones. It was like my sternum was really bad, my femurs were really bad. And then the brain fog was horrific. Like, I couldn't remember my name. It felt like it was just, words were tough, energy was down. But the biggest thing for me was the mental aspect of it. And I struggled. I always go to a very depressed state first. That's like my immediate place in a herx. And so I was figuring out how we navigate this, because I couldn't keep going like that, because I was like so dark that I was like, this is not gonna be a good situation for anyone.
Yep. I think I experience that now as well. And my biggest thing is always, okay, have to like work myself out of this. We're not going backwards. It's just a herx. We will end up getting better. My last herx I was very proud of myself for not spiraling down as far as I normally do. It always wins. But I'm curious with what helped you the most through, because I think that's something that I talk about a lot, and I think the Tick Boot Camp is very good about talking about, but the mental aspect of it all, because a lot of Lyme symptoms are physical, but the mental symptoms that can come from the bugs itself, but the mental symptoms that can come from the journey itself are also, they're as debilitating sometimes as the physical symptoms are. So how was that for you, and how did you overcome those?
It's very silly, but I rescued a dog. And that I was in school, I was away from my family, and I rescued this little dog, and she became my whole world, was this dog. And it was like, I had to take her outside, and we had to go on walks. And so she was really good. Like, I still call this dog, she's 16 years old now, or 15 years old now. And I call her my guardian angel, because she would get me out, and she would get me moving, and she would like force me to just not sit around and just be super, miserable, and not, sitting like sulking in how I felt. And then I had a really good friend that she was like my rock in that. And she she was there. She was my roommate in college. And so she was there and she was able to be like, okay, I can see that you're not feeling great. What's gonna, like, do you want to do a movie night? Do you want to we can make gluten-free, chocolate chip cookies with no sugar and we can do that? Or do you want to go on a walk? Or do you want to go, like, she was always really good at feeling out how I was feeling and try to get me out of it enough, but not make it where I was hiding it. So she was very helpful in that. And then, my parents, my mom would fly up all the time, and come hang out, and we would do, oh, you want to go get your nails done, or let's just get out and do stuff. And so it was just like having people that were supportive, that could meet you where you were at, that weren't going to be like, let's go run a marathon or anything crazy, but they're willing to meet you where you were at. And just being around good people, I think, made it doable, where I was like, okay, I got this. And then they would remind me the days I didn't think I had it, they would. And my mom would always say, it's just a bad day, but you've got tomorrow. And it was just that reminder of tomorrow's coming. It's going to be a better day. It's going to be a better day.
I love that. Having your tribe is always so important. And tomorrow was a better day because now you are helping others with their Lyme journey get better. So can you start talking about how creating your own practice and all of that began? So the Lyme journey's happening at the same time. Is that right?
When I was in school, yep. So then I was finishing up school and I was like, okay, we are definitely going into the functional medicine side. So I went and did, as I was finishing up school, studied the IFM, did the IFM stuff, Institute of Functional Medicine stuff. And I started working at a practice. That was what brought me out to Austin, was started working at a functional medicine practice. And what was really cool was the owner of it really was not Lyme literate at all. And so I brought this new perspective, and I brought all this new funky stuff like coffee enemas and all the funky stuff we all do, and really brought a new perspective to the practice of like, okay, I think you're missing a big piece. Like, yes, you're looking at, parasites and you're looking at all these other things, but we aren't looking at Lyme. And so I started working with her, and we added in a lot of these different detox modalities that I used on myself, and then started seeing the Lyme people. And it was intimidating at first, because it's like, I can work on myself and I can feel it. I know if it's working, I know if it's not. But to start working on other people, I was like, oh gosh, like, I don't want to be another trauma to someone. I actually then studied under Dr. Darren Ingalls, who, we always joke he wrote the book on Lyme disease, because he did, but studied under him to learn his protocols, and started going to Lyme conferences and just really immersed myself in it from not the patient perspective, but being the practitioner. And then, yeah, just have grown it into, now it's, you hear funky symptoms, we're running a Lyme test.
Yep. I think the journey from patient to being Lyme doctor is so important and needed, because the purpose of how this podcast became a podcast is like, the patients know best, because no one gets it until you get it. And the fact that you were thinking that your mindset was, oh, I don't want to be another trauma, means that you're doing it right, because you know what it's like to have those doctors that look at you and tell you that you're crazy. So I commend you for that. And I'm so grateful that you are out there helping everybody that needs it down there in Texas. And
well, thank you.
So I want to ask a little bit, as much as you can talk about, you have a patient that comes in, they have the telltale Lyme signs. What do you do? Like, what is your action plan? What is your go-to first? I know we're very data driven, right?
Yeah, so very data driven. So run a Lyme test. I would say the hardest part is, so many people that have struggled for so long, is the financial burden, and these tests are not cheap. And so if we can, let's run a Lyme test. And, of course, if someone's like, yeah, go ahead, then we're going to run a full Lyme panel. But the biggest thing is the financial burden that so many people have faced, because you go to all these doctors, they're out of pocket, you've run all these tests and you've gotten nowhere. So by the time they see me, they're 20 to 100 grand into their health. And that's the average person. And so ideally we're getting as much data as we possibly can. Other times, sometimes I'll say, okay, this isn't a great shot, but let's see if you can, you've got a good GP. Let's see if we can get your insurance to cover it, go through them. Let's see if we can get a Lyme test, but it's trying to work with them to find a solution to get the testing that's going to work and not put a bigger financial burden on them that they can take on.
Yeah. Along those lines, I'm curious how you handle when patients just have the medical fatigue that comes with having been on this journey. Like I'm sure you had, after being misdiagnosed almost and no diagnosis for like almost 15 years. When they come in, they're already just like, I feel like the defenses are up. How do you handle those?
I feel like I'm very good at disarming people because I'll talk about my own journey and I'll try to lighten it with like, I understand where you're at. Like I can give you my perspective and this is what I went through and this is my take on it. But I try to just be a person to someone. That's really what it is, right? I want to listen to you and I'm going to tell you what I think and this is my journey and what I experienced. And if I don't think I'm the best fit for you, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to refer you to someone else that is a good fit for you. But I think it's just not coming in with this big ego of I'm so smart and, listen to me. It's being kind and listening and just being a real person to them.
That's so important. And I want to talk now about the Meraki Wellness Center and your journey there. And I want to like, can you go through the different detoxes that you talk about so much? And I have more questions along that, but I feel like we're ready for this.
Yes. So the cool thing, so when I was thinking about starting my practice, I wanted a name that really brought in my whole journey of what I'd gone through and where we're at now. And so Meraki in Greek means to put your soul into your work. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's this. This is my passion. This is my, all of the horrible things I had to go through bring me to this, that I can help people. So that was what led me to pick that name that nobody pronounces right. But I'm like, just look at what it means. That's all that matters. Look at what it means. And so, with Lyme and really my own journey, it wasn't until later that I think the data on this was coming out. There's so many other hits to the system. It's rarely just Lyme, right? You're usually stacked with a million other things. And so I really like to look at the full picture. I want to know everything that's in your body: mold, heavy metals, environmental toxins, so plastics, pesticides, VOCs. I want to know everything that's in there. And then we can create a plan, and I have various detoxes to get it all out. But it's looking at like, how can we lower the load on the immune system for so many people? If they've got a big mold load or they have a big, heavy metal load, if you can pull some of that off, it makes the Lyme journey a lot easier on them because you're not dealing with 30 toxins, you're dealing with just the Lyme piece.
Yeah. I think that's something that is so important, that a lot of people, I feel like they get the Lyme diagnosis and they're like, okay, this will be like, at least for me, I was like, this will be an easy fix. It's a disease, it gets quick, but all of those added things add up and that can cause your journey to go any which way. And it's so important to have those. I'm curious to see what is the most common things that you find with people, with patients.
Usually someone with Lyme, and I will speak on myself, they're the worst labs. Like my labs, it looks like a joke. When I ran a tox panel, it looked like someone was like playing a joke. Every single toxin, every single mold was all off the charts. And it's like, I think your body just gets to a place where it just cannot handle it. And we get exposed to thousands of toxins a day. So, it's that we had a leak or a flood in my house when, we had a big rainstorm. So we got mold. Yeah, it was fixed, but I still took that in. And then it was, some metals and some environmental toxins. And so I think when you have a lot of Lyme in your body, it's just too much that you don't detox that. So generally I'd say probably the biggest correlation is mold and Lyme. Those two are buddies, and you see a huge correlation, and mold is the perfect storm because mold is immunosuppressant. So you have mold in your system, tanks your immune system, and now it's very easy for the Lyme to just run rampant. So I see that a lot, but generally it's a little bit of everything. They tend to have heavy metals, they tend to have parasites, they tend to have environmental toxins, just a little bit of everything.
I have a little bit of everything. So it's interesting what you're saying. But what is if someone comes in, what are the top 3 things that you suggest that they do immediately and that they don't do, if that makes sense? Either things that they do or don't do to help them start feeling better immediately.
My first foundational thing is getting their diet like extremely dialed in. I want an extremely, like, there's no wiggle room on this anti-inflammatory diet. We're cutting out gluten, dairy, sugar, soy. It's the foundational thing. Because I always tell people, if your diet isn't dialed in, we're going to have a way harder time getting through the rest of this. So let's get your diet dialed in, and let's just get your lifestyle very, very clean. I don't want toxins. I don't want any of that in your day-to-day lifestyle. Then we can go through testing and, come up with a plan. But if your foundational pieces, are you drinking water? That's a huge thing. And it's so simple, right? Are you drinking water, and is it clean? Are you eating, enough protein and a good clean diet? If those things aren't dialed in, then we're going to have a heck of a time. And I always tell people, my big no-no is staying off of some of the Facebook groups, and especially in the beginning when it's very overwhelming, is staying off of these groups where it's the negativity just spirals. It's very easy, and I got caught up in it, to get stuck on, seeing these things about how, oh my God, I'm never going to get better, or, I'm in a wheelchair, and it feels very negative. And so I tell people, stay off of anything negative. And even with social media, be very mindful of the accounts you're following. If you're following someone and they're just posting about this journey that's very rough on them, it's not really the social media that you want to intake. So I always tell people, be very careful about the social media content you interact with and that you take in. Let's focus on positivity and things that are going to push you forward, not pull you backwards.
That's so, so important. And I wish someone would have taught me that earlier as well. There was a couple of months ago, I was in a deep, dark place. And I remember my TikTok feed just like kept being all of these chronically ill people that like, I'll never find a partner or something like that. And I'm like, this is not the content I need to be consuming right now. I just like, my friend was like, delete your TikTok for a while, just like get off of it, find something else. And it is so important. Like, I think the groups are very helpful at times, but they can also be very hurtful. So being mindful of how you are doing. And I was reading one of the articles earlier, and I am when I finally became like food literate, that was a huge game changer for me. Like the biggest thing I always tell people as well is like, your food is your medicine. And I love that you said your food can be your medicine, but it can also be your poison. And I wish that people, and one of my best friends is a dietitian. And so like, this is what we talk about all the time, because it truly is. And the stuff, especially in the American diet, that we are just given, like you were talking about how that's how you grew up. That's how I grew up as well. And I still, like, my family will make fun of me for the things that I eat and don't eat. It doesn't fit the normal bill, but it is truly so, so important. And I'm curious what you think are the top few, like, absolutely no. I know you said like the no dairy, gluten things, but like, so a basic American diet, what are we cutting out first besides like just like actual food items?
Anything processed. I just want you eating real food. So if we can cut out processed foods, and for a lot of people, that is a huge step in itself, right? Because you go from the standard American diet to then like, they're like, well, what do I eat? And they immediately think I have to eat like chicken and salad. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We can still eat fun and it can be fabulous, but let's cut out processed foods. I want seed oils cut out. And then it's cutting down sugar. It's going organic if you can, especially the Dirty Dozen. It's looking at like, where are the biggest hits, but it's then from there you can get a lot more specialized, and you want, high protein and high fats, but you've got to start where someone's at and baby step it. I was on a call this morning and with a client of mine, and he was like, you gave me so much information last time. What is step number 1? And I'm like, okay, I got to meet you where you're at, right? And he's going from a very standard American diet. So step number 1 for him, he already eats organic, so the quality is good, but step number 1 is I want you to increase your protein. That's step number 1. And you just, baby step it. And then in no time, you've got a very clean diet, but it's really cutting out the processed stuff, cutting out the convenience, the fast food, all of that. It's all got to go.
Can you explain a little bit of the why behind that? Because I think like telling people to do it is something, because like I was 14 when someone first told me like, okay, you can't have sugar and you can't have gluten. And I was like, absolutely not. But then it was like a year later when a doctor finally like kind of yelled at me, but I needed it. And she explained the why behind it for me, that I was like, oh, locked in, and I've been gluten and sugar free since. But yeah, why can't I have processed foods?
So with processed foods, with additives, with gluten, with any of it, really for me, what the biggest piece is, one, it's just your body, like, it's not adequate fuel for your body, and more in the process realm. But what we're looking at is, as you're moving forward, we want your inflammation level to be as low as humanly possible. You might not be having a an allergy to gluten or even a sensitivity, but it is inflammatory at its core. And so what we want to do is pull out every possible inflammatory so that your inflammation level from a diet perspective is as low as possible. That allows us to move forward. We're not, dealing with the inflammation fire that it's basically like every inflammatory food is adding gasoline to the fire. And so we can get that fire as low as possible. It allows us to move forward a lot smoother. Your body gets fuel that it likes. And it allows people really, I think the biggest thing is just to move forward faster without, lots of gut inflammation and reactions and all that.
That's great. I hope people listening, if you haven't changed your diet, maybe this will help you. I'm also curious, you talk a lot about on your website about sleep. And that was always a huge thing for me in my journey, and a lot of Lyme people that I've spoke to. Like, one, I was exhausted all the time, but then I couldn't sleep. I always tell people sleep is my favorite thing to do. I'm really bad at it. And what do you find with people with Lyme that you work with? Like, what are their biggest sleep issues, and what are some things that you can help people with to get better at sleep? Because you can't heal if you don't sleep.
No, you have to sleep. You have to get good sleep. And this is something I struggled with. And I think it was a blessing because I'm like, I've got the sleep game dialed in from all the things I tried. But, you have to get your sleep routine down just like you have to get your diet down. It's not you just climb into bed and close your eyes when you've got things that really can mess with your sleep. So it's getting a routine, and it can be things that are very simple, like wearing blue light blockers 2 hours before bed, those yellow orange sunglasses that you wear so you're not getting blue light in. It can be having your house really cold. Everyone that comes to my house is always like, oh gosh, we're in the igloo because I sleep at, my house is 65 degrees at night. I sleep very, very cold. It's having, no phone before bed. And in the world of scrolling, and many people that are dealing with chronic illness is you're home a lot. And so it's scrolling and being on their phones, but not being on your phone 2 hours before bed, having the room pitch black. No, I don't want a night light. I don't want anything, no light at all. Having that, having, really, really good sheets that aren't too hot. You can even get like a cooling mattress pad. Those things are amazing. So that getting the sleep foundation set is key. And then what I've leaned on is various herbs that have helped, sleep. And so if someone really needs it, you can use herbs, but we have to find a way to hack someone's sleep so that they can get good, restful sleep and their body can heal.
Now I want to go to sleep. I am also curious because you mentioned a symptom that you had was weight gain and like struggles with like trying to lose weight and stuff like that. And that's a big one because I ran a Lyme group for teens and young adults with Lyme, and it was majority were women, but that was like a huge issue that a lot of people experience. And I didn't experience that really until I came off of birth control a few years ago, and that caused a whole hormonal imbalance situation. But I think that's also leads into like you work with hormones and stuff like that. So what did you find with, or how do you like work with that kind of situation when a lot of people have struggles with Lyme with weight gain, weight loss? People can't do either or.
Yeah, for me personally, it was the inflammation battle. And I've always, my body, the second something goes slightly wrong, it's always inflammation. And so for me, it was personally getting the inflammation down. And when I did, it like fell off me. I mean, like in a way that on paper couldn't happen. I think I lost like 35 pounds in a month. You can't lose 35 pounds in a month, but it was just pure inflammation. And so I always tell people, your body is always trying to protect you. And a lot of times it's holding on to weight. And we know that if got a high toxic load, the body will store toxins and fat cells. So your body is protecting you a lot of times. And so your body can't let go of those fat cells because it can't deal with those toxins. So I always tell people, you have to be patient. Just be patient with this. It's the worst symptom and I can understand it, but just be patient. As we lower your inflammation and the body heals, all of a sudden it'll drop off. And by doing that, of course, we all know that as you're cleaning up someone's diet and you're detoxing and you're, killing microbes and all that, you can get the hormones to rebalance. So then from a hormonal standpoint, weight comes off, but you just have to be patient on that one. It varies from person to person. I've seen it where it takes people a year to lose weight. I've seen it where a month in a client loses weight immediately. And so it's just remembering that our body's protecting us and just being patient with it and just go through the steps and do the right things, eat well, sleep, take all your supplements and all that, and it will eventually get to a happy place.
So, Dr. Thompson, we always like to ask our doctors in particular, and I guess patients who've been on the journey about a framework we've developed here at Take Boot Camp, because we see folks going through a pattern of healing, and we call our observed pattern the PARM healing formula. Now, Matt and I are both Italian, so it's hard for us not to bring Parmesan in, but it's P, we describe it as prehabilitation. A is assist, because we know we really shouldn't just be killing, but we should be assisting our immune system when we're trying to reduce the microbial load. R is rehabilitation. We have to go through a process of rehabilitating your body and your brain. And then M is your maintenance, so that you recognize you can't go back to those behaviors in the way that you were eating and not moving and not sleeping, or you can almost guarantee that you're going to relapse, right? So talk to us about your perspective on our PALM formula, or I should say PARM formula, where we first want to focus on prehabilitation, which it sounds like you do when somebody's first coming to work with you, where we recommend that, like you, that folks focus on their diet and only eat food that you would see in nature, right? If it doesn't look like that in nature, if that piece of meat doesn't look like that in nature, do not eat it, right? We like to talk about movement, right? Because you have to go through a process of physically detoxing, right? We have systems that don't have pumps, and if you're not moving, you're likely to be more toxic. We like to recommend that folks focus on their sleep in the same way that you do, and including all the stuff that you talked about, including setting your circadian rhythm, where you're looking at the sun in the morning for 2 minutes, and then you're looking at the sun on the way down. So being aware of when the sun is rising and setting, right? Focusing on various social detoxing tools, right? Because if you're around people who are energy vampires, and you don't have energy, then of course you're going to find yourself in a bad place. So it's not just social media, which I would tell you shouldn't be involved in at all, but certainly even other people in your life who are energy vampires, who you just really have to be brave enough to take a break from as well. We also like to focus on your environment, right? Because you did point out that if you're in a moldy environment, you're not going to be able to heal. I don't care what you do, you're not going to be able to heal. You got to get out of that moldy environment. You have to identify whether or not you're in a moldy environment. Then, of course, we have I think the really big piece, which is of course the psychological piece, right? Because there are many of us have neural pathways that have been keeping us protected during the course of the time that we're sick. But unfortunately, they're not going to serve us while we're on the healing journey. And it is important to work with a good therapist to help you to get through not just the gaslighting that you've had to face, but also because of all the neurological changes that are taking, in part because bugs in your brain, but in part because you're constantly in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system because you're being attacked, right? So we like to focus on those pieces during the prehab piece. And there's one more piece of sleeping, of course, which is that your brain cannot detox if you're not sleeping, right? You can't get any of these toxins out of your brain if you're not sleeping. So give me your perspective first on our argument that prehabilitation is the most important first step so that you can prepare yourself for the second step in this process, which will of course be when you're going to be reducing the microbe load.
I will say 150% yes on that. I won't start working with someone. We will not go into a detox. We will not do anything until that is dialed in, because until you've done those foundational things and you've changed your diet, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I need to see the steps taken to get there. It's an uphill battle that I can't win if you haven't taken those first steps. So all of those things are absolutely essential, and they're the foundations of healing. Everything else is, it's yes, you have to go through it, you have to detox, you have to do all that. But if you haven't dialed in all of those foundational pieces, it's a very tough battle. And the mental aspect is something I downplayed a lot. And it wasn't until I was in a very stressful practice, I had a really big emotional trigger, and I relapsed, and I relapsed hard. I came crashing down. And I was a little cocky, and I was like, I am, but prior to this, I am good. I've been good for a while. Everything's great. And I did not do any of the mental, emotional side piece, because I was like, I don't need that. We're through that. And that relapse that I had was it was pretty rough, and it was rough mentally. And I started with a therapist, and started doing, I even did hypnotherapy and did all these various things. And that's when it like clicked of like, oh, that mental, that mind, body, soul, that mind piece is really, really important. And so now I push that extremely hard, because it's easy to say that it's not that important, and no, it doesn't bother me. That all those traumas, I'm through it, but no, that subconscious mind is powerful. And so the mental, the subconscious, all of that is so essential to healing and staying well, because what you don't want is some little trigger comes and everything comes crashing back.
Right, because when we because we're not trained on how our brain functions, and because we don't know what a trigger is, and we don't know the difference between being in the sympathetic and the sympathetic expression of our nervous system, we don't realize that as we become very sensitive to triggers, that we find ourselves in the sympathetic expression of our nervous system. And when we're in the sympathetic expression of our nervous system, especially all the time, that's going to have a very negative impact on our ability to fight off microbes. Why? Our immune system is going to be shut down. We're certainly going to be suppressed, right? Our digestive system is going to be shut down, right? We're going to have all kinds of stress chemicals teeming through our body, right? And you started talking about that, those hormonal imbalances, right? And the totality of all of that, of course, is that we're not fighting off the bugs. And if we're not fighting off the bugs are either eating the stuff that we need to be nutritionally healthy, or they're eating us, right? And when they're eating us or eating the stuff that we need to be functioning well, they're growing inside of us. And when they're growing inside of us, they're moving around us. And this cycle becomes, a really vicious cycle, right? But we were never taught how our brain works. We were never taught that being in fight or flight and being there chronically is going to have an impact on our ability to heal. In fact, it's going to have an impact on causing us to get sicker and sicker. And getting, as you had, I think, so brilliantly pointed out during your conversation with Cassie, by the way, it was a really beautiful conversation you two were having with what we describe as the prehabilitation phase of this. In some cases, we've been taught by some folks that we've interviewed on this podcast that that's enough. That once you're getting yourself in a healthy place, you're getting all that dialed in as you described, Dr. Thompson, your body can take over and can beat back these microbes. In the cases where you now need to assist your immune system with beating down those microbes, whether it be with antibiotics or other natural antibiotics, which I know you're a big advocate of on the herbal side. Now, we have to be really careful when we get into that phase, because what's happening when we get into that phase, or I'd like you to comment on it, is that we're going to have all these dead bugs in our system, and if we're not able to detox and get those dead bugs out of our system through sleep with those bugs that are in our brain, and through movement with the bugs that are in our body, then we're going to become more toxic. We're going to become, our immune system is going to be more challenged, because it may continue to attack the bugs that are already dead. And we may become even sicker than we were before. So one of the things I thought was so brilliant about your requirement that the people you work with go through what we call prehabilitation before you will help them to kill the bugs, is that you don't want them to get sicker if they're killing the bugs and they can't get the bugs out of their system. So help us with that piece of it.
The drainage pathways, the detox pathways, for so many people, you've got so many factors that can set you up for failure in this, right? You've got detox genetics that a lot of people have not in their favor. You've got, you know, high toxic loads, you've got this Lyme component. And so it's a job to get those detox pathways open and keep them open. And nowadays we have so many cool modalities to help, right? And it's finding for that person what's going to help. Sometimes it's supplements, sometimes food's enough. They can give their food the right nutrients and their liver and their body's like, we are good to go. You pair that with some sleep and some good water and they can handle that. I was always someone that needed way more than that. I needed, you know, supplements that supported my liver and my gallbladder and my kidneys. And that's where I brought in coffee enemas and saunas and, you know, all dry brushing and all of the cool detox modalities that we have to make sure that my body was always detoxing and then listening to it, because sometimes you go in a killing phase and all of a sudden your body's like, nope, we need to slow down. And you have to be willing to kind of ebb and flow with what's going on with the body, because it's a lot to push the stuff out of our systems. And so you got to keep those detox pathways primed and open and moving things through. You have to be going to the bathroom every day. That's something I see all the time. People are like, oh, I go to the bathroom twice a week. I have a bowel movement twice a week. That is a very clear indication that you are not detoxing well at all, or that I don't sweat. If you don't sweat, you're not detoxing well. So we need those things to be dialed in to make sure that your body can move these things out. Because if you start building up either dead bugs or just toxins in general, you don't feel good. It's not going to be fun.
Right. And it's really why you're chronically in the first place, right? I mean, your system is overwhelmed with all of the, you know, all of the bugs and all the toxins. And because you're overwhelmed with all that, your immune system's not functioning, which is why you're chronically ill. And you don't want to add to that. I mean, we've had many people on this podcast, and we've highlighted the folks who have killed too quickly or too aggressively, right? Because, you know, we have the suck it up mentality in many cases, and the desire to get through this as quickly as possible. So, you know, you'll say to yourself, no matter what it takes, no matter how much pain it is, no matter what it is, I want to do it as quickly as possible. I want to kill as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And we've seen some of those people become so much worse that they become wheelchair bound. They become worse when they're killing off the bugs. And so you have to listen to your body. And you and Kathy had that really, I think, powerful conversation about herxing, right? That's your body telling you you're doing too much. Right? You have to walk it back a little bit, or you have to do something else to detox at a more effective level, right? And another thing that I really loved about, you know, your story was you talked about your guardian angel, right? The dog that made you get up and walk, right? We've had many people tell us that they walked themselves to health, right? Dr. Bill Rawls, for example, one of the leaders in this community, said he walked himself to health. Why? Because he just kept walking and kept walking and kept walking. And that movement ultimately does help you to detox, right? It does put you in a position. And you had the little angel, now 16 years old, that gave you the incentive to move because she had to go out and walk and you had to bring her out. And that movement was really helpful to you on your journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was that something else depended on me. It was easy to let all my normal stuff go. Like, oh, I don't feel like it. But now you've got something that depends on you. And so I was like, oh no, you know, this little thing needs me. And so that really helped. And people like to downplay walking. It should never be downplayed. Walking is the easiest and it's free. You can do it anywhere and it makes a noticeable difference and it doesn't add stress to you. You're not going to see a cortisol response. It's not generally going to hurt you. And so just walk, get out and walk. If it's 5 minutes, if it's 20 minutes, if it's 30 minutes or an hour, whatever your body can do. But people always like, oh, like, you know, I want to go do a yoga class or whatever. But no, a lot of times just simplify it. Just walk.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing, of course, when you're walking outside is it not only isn't it immunosuppressive, which running will be in many cases, right? I mean, if you're running too much, your T cell count is going to be reduced and it is going to be immunosuppressive, right? But that will not happen when you're walking, right? The other thing is, of course, if you're doing outside, breathing is part of the detoxification process as well, right? Taking in taking in that fresh air while you're walking and doing it conservatively is going to be a really important part of the detox process. So let's talk about the kill phase, or what we call here the assist phase. What types of things did you use when you were on the journey? What kinds of things do you use with the folks that you work with when helping them to kill the bugs or reduce the microbe load?
I used Dr. Zhang's protocol. And so I used his herbs. I use a lot of them. The downside, they work phenomenally. The downside is they're expensive. And so sometimes I'll use, I'm drawing a blank on the company I use, but I'll use their tinctures. So I just, I use, it depends. You can use certain herbs for certain bugs, and there's kind of a scale of how aggressive you can go, and you build up to that. But I've always really loved Dr. Zhang's, his herbals. I think they work very, very well. The downside is they're very strong, so you do have to ease in, but I do like his herbals. And then again, sometimes I just use, really low dose single herbs that are tinctures, and we just slowly build up, but it's meeting the person where they're at. What can they tolerate? Sometimes you have people and they think that harder, more aggressive, give me the strongest thing. And I'm like, because you said that, I think we're going to go the other realm, because I've learned this really interesting correlation is that the people that want the strongest usually need the weakest. And it's not to say that it's a weaker herb because, it's going to take longer. It's just their bodies don't need that crazy herb. So start low and slow, build up, never go with the big aggressive guns right off the bat. And, the thing with herbals is you have to see if they work, and they don't work for everyone. And sometimes you have to move into the medical route, and you have to know your limits of if the herbals are not making a dent and you've tried various herbals, okay, then maybe you need to go the antibiotic route. And there's nothing wrong with that. Should never be shamed. It should never be spoken negatively of, oh, you used antibiotics, I used herbals. You hear that conversation a lot, and every body is different. What one person responds to is completely different than another person, and you have to find what that body is going to do best with and do that for the person.
One of the reasons, Dr. Thompson, we recommend that folks in our community work with a doctor who has been on the Lyme journey themselves is because only people like you and Cassidy could describe what a herx is, what it feels like when you should be herxing and the right level of herxing, so that you're killing off enough, but not putting yourself in a position where you're herxing so hard that you're going to make yourself really sick and ultimately, maybe more chronically ill. So we strongly recommend that folks in our community work with someone like you who's been there, who understands what it is. Do you think, because of your experience as a Lyme patient yourself, you have the ability to A, help people to understand how to read their body, and B, you have the ability, better than you would have had you not been on the Lyme journey, to help them understand when they can amp it up, so that they are in fact killing enough, but not killing too much?
Absolutely. I think my own body was a human experiment, right? Of like, okay, how far can we push this? And what does that do? And you learn those limits, and you feel the effect of when that limit is pushed. And when you push it, you pay the price for a little bit. And so when you've gone through that, one, it really helps to prep them. And okay, this is what you're going to expect. This is what I felt. This is what other people feel. This is normal, and explaining a herx from a normal perspective, and then telling them, okay, but if you're feeling this way 4 or 5, 6 days in, it's not lifting, it's not getting any better, you're not seeing any improvements, you need to come back to me and let me know, because we need to back it down. And so I think it's living through that personally to understand like what that feels like from a physical perspective, and also what it feels like from a mental perspective. What a herx feels like, I think, gives you really an ability to be like, to navigate it in a much better ability than if you hadn't. Because if I explained a herx to someone and they've never been through it, you'd be like, yeah, your symptoms flare up, but the mental, the emotional, like the physical aspect of it, I think living through it really gives you an idea of like, I can see when someone's teetering and we need to pull it back. The physical symptoms might not be that bad, but for them, maybe it's more of the mental side. So it gives you that edge of like, I've seen this. Let's pull it back. Let's let your body calm down a little bit, and then we can push forward.
Well, let me ask you about the other side of that coin, which is when we should be either pivoting to another protocol, or we should be pushing the protocol more, because part of what could be happening when someone is symptomatic is that you're killing too much. But part of what may be happening is the bugs are taking off because you're not killing enough. So talk to us about how you strike that balance, and you understand when it's time to push more despite the symptoms, and when it's time to walk it back.
With pushing more, you want to see a little flare up, a little bit of a herx, and then it should get better. And as things get better, then you leave it for a little bit, and then you're going to push again. And so you kind of want to just see this little up and down, but you ultimately want to see things getting better, and then you can push forward a little bit harder. And it's incremental, right? You're talking like, you know, we're going to increase like a drop, or it's very, very small amounts. We're not ever jumping huge amounts. But if you're going and you've gone on a protocol, you're at full doses, you're not seeing anything. You're not seeing anything for a little bit. Sometimes you have to give it a bit. I've seen it where people, they do fine for the first week, and then all of a sudden they get enough in their system, and then bam, it pops up. So you have to give it a little bit of time. But once you've got enough time behind you, a few weeks behind you, and you're not seeing anything, you need to pivot. This isn't the right protocol for them. And that's where the bioindividuality is key, right? Because you could have the best protocol in the world for one person, and for another person, it doesn't put a dent in it. And so it's just how their body responds. So if you're not seeing the changes or the herxes or the improvements or anything, no change at all means we need to shift gears.
Okay. So let's talk about the bioindividuality, because there's two pieces to that, right? One is each one of us is genetically unique, although not as, I don't think, as diverse as people like to believe. I mean, we have 99% of our genetics is similar to that of a primate, right? So the genetic diversity that we spend a lot of time talking about in this community, I think, is overstated, quite frankly. I may be wrong, but I'm certainly going to voice that opinion. But then, of course, we have the diversity of bugs that have been spit into us, right? Because we know that every person is going to be different based on the tick or ticks that they've been bitten by, or based on the other ways that they could be exposed to it. And, you know, a black-legged tick, for example, can have as many as 200 different microbes harbored in its gut, which is being spit into you. But it could be Lyme and Barton with one. It could be, you know, it could be Borrelia and Babesia in another. It could be Anaplasma, you know, I mean, we have all these combinations, right? So, you know, I think it's important for us when we're having these conversations to help folks understand that part of it may be their biodiversity, their genetic diversity, but and actually, and I think your gut diversity probably plays a larger role, quite frankly, than your genetic diversity. So I certainly like your opinion on that. But of course, we also are going to have a different sort of combination of bugs in our system from the tick bite and all the other germs that our body's been harboring over time. So give me a perspective on that diversity piece, and how much you think genetic diversity is important as opposed to gut diversity and the diversity of bugs that have been spit into us by the tick bites.
I think genetics, we do, you know, there are variations of genetics, and where we look at them is in detox genetics, but I do think they can all be hacked, right? So if you don't make glutathione, we can give you glutathione. You don't methylate, we give you methylated Bs. We can hack a lot of the genetics that people love to harp on. So I don't get hung up on that aspect, because we can really biohack a lot of those. Where I think bioindividuality is the aspect of all of these different microbes and how they affect every person differently. You can have two people that both have Barton Babesia, right? And they manifest completely different. They react different to things, and it's how they affect your body. And really, where, you know, maybe you have one that's way bigger and way stronger than the other. And so I think it's what microbes you have, and it's the whole microbe standpoint, right? What of the Lyme and co-infection family do you have? Do you have parasites? Do you have mold? What is your microbiome like? Because for so many people, if you are on the standard American diet, you probably don't have the best microbiome, you know, to begin with, is if you're not really focusing on gut health and eating really well. So what is your microbiome? Because we now know how important to being, you know, your immune system and every aspect of our body relies on our own microbiome. So there's so many components of it that we don't really know until we're getting in there how people are being affected by various things. And you've got the potential of so many different co-infections that all stack and make complex layers that we have to, you know, go at. And that does change protocols to a certain extent. But yeah, there's so much in the realm of bioindividuality. My sister has Lyme as well. Not many symptoms. On paper, we're very, very similar. But if you look at her symptoms versus my symptoms and how we both go at it, the protocol I did for myself didn't do a thing for her. She went and did a different protocol. I put her on a different protocol, and it worked beautifully. And so it's like, you just have to kind of pivot with where people are at. And if it's not working, move on to the next.
So, and this is a tangent before we get to rehab. Do you think you and your sister both have Lyme because it's possible that it was congenitally passed on to you? Or do you think you both have Lyme because you grew up in a tick endemic community or a Lyme endemic community and you were just both bitten? What are your thoughts on that?
We've circled on this. Her and I have, we've definitely spiraled on this of like, you know, and it's one of those things that you eventually just have to give up on because we're never going to know the answer. My mom is not tested. Neither of my parents have wanted to test themselves for it. Neither of them have symptoms. They've kind of just wanted to not do the testing, and you just have to respect that. So we don't know if my mom carries it. So it's like one of those things where my sister and I will be like, where do you think we got it? Everyone's like, every Christmas, this conversation comes up at the dinner table. Do you think we got it at home or do you think we got it from mom? And I think for my mom, the perspective is she has guilt. If she gave it to us, there's guilt around that. And we've tried to get like, let her off the hook. Like, you didn't know, there's nothing to feel guilty about. But who knows where we got it from. She's interesting and she's really had no symptoms. So it was just really for her. When I tested, she tested and she tested positive. So it was just one of those, she handled it very well.
Well, thank God, right?
I
So
know.
now let's talk about after the kill phase. After you've completed you know, the phase of assisting the immune system and reducing the microbe load. Do you have any recommendations for rehabilitation? And if you do, does that include neural retraining? Because you, of course, will have neural pathways that were created to help you while you were going through the illness phase and protecting you from what you needed to be protected from, but then those neural pathways are no longer serving you. And in many cases, you can remain symptomatic even though the bugs have been killed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we work through along the way. And then as maintenance, absolutely, you need to go through, and they have various options of, you know, kind of what resonates with a person. You have to meet them where they're at. Sometimes if you tell someone, I want you to go do hypnotherapy, they're like, okay, crazy. Definitely not for me. But you can be like, okay, I want you to do something like primal trust. And they're like, great, that's perfect for me. So I'm a big believer in it. And it's something that we do along the way. And then I really focus on it as let's make sure this never comes back. We don't want to ever see this flare up. So we need to get your brain, we need to rewire that brain. We don't want it wired in the sick ways. We want to, you know, rewire it so that we can prevent this from happening from a subconscious standpoint.
Yeah, we've interviewed many folks who remain symptomatic until they actually retrain their brain. I mean, I think Rachel Leland is sort of the leader in the community that's teaching that the best. And her book, by the way, was brilliant. When we interviewed her, she really blew us away. But Rachel continued to be unbelievably symptomatic until she went through a neural retraining. And then when she went through a neural retraining, the symptoms dissipated and she ultimately became symptom-free. So it is important for folks to understand that that there is going to be this process of neural retraining. But what about other rehab? Are there any physical rehabilitation protocols that you recommend in addition to the neural retraining?
I am so the biggest thing for me is education for people on you really have to figure out what a rehab looks like moving forward for the rest of your life. And it's finding things like, what is that going to look like? You're always going to want to be on supplements that support your body's natural detoxification systems. Your diet is always going to need to be dialed in. Then from there, I think we have, you know, sleep and water and all that all has to stay dialed in. Then from there, we have wiggle room. And so for some people, that's doing the sauna 3 times a week. For some people, that's exercising. For some people, that's coffee enemas continually. It's finding a maintenance program moving forward that you can maintain for the rest of your life that keeps your body clean and we never build up toxins. And I always tell people, you're going to be a little more high maintenance than the rest of the world. You always are, and you just have to be okay with that. I always say it's going to keep you around longer because you're not going to have toxins and your body's going to be clean of stuff. But you're going to be a little more high maintenance. So let's figure out what that looks like for you and what is a thing that you can keep doing, because if it's something that's too hard or too much, you're not going to stay up with it. So what does that look like? How do we tailor it for you of something that you can do and you still enjoy? And then we, do that moving forward. But it's imperative that we come up with a maintenance plan moving forward.
One of the things we learned from the brilliant Allie Hilfiger when we interviewed her, and I actually learned this when I read her book, Bite Me, was that what you're doing during the course of this process of healing is you're building a toolbox. You're building your personal toolbox. You understand what you need to do to remain physically healthy. You understand what you need to do to remain emotionally healthy. You understand what you need to do to remain socially healthy, right? And what you do is you have this toolbox that you take with you, and you just constantly go back to those tools so that you can maintain your health and you don't find yourself relapsing, right? And of course, hopefully on this journey, folks will also be learning about how not to get reinfected, right? You have to learn how to make sure that you're engaging in behaviors that will not result in you getting another tick bite. Because 80% of the people who have Lyme disease never remember a tick bite. And that's a large part because these ticks are really sophisticated, stealthy, vectors that most of us never even find. I mean, and I shared with, the two of you that what triggered me to start Tick Boot Camp with Matt was I had a tick that was feeding on me for several days. And I didn't even know it until I rubbed my hand on that tick. Thankfully, I did not get sick from that. But that is an important life lesson. And many of the people that we've trained on how to avoid coming in contact with ticks or getting bitten by ticks have found ticks biting them on many occasions. And the argument they make is, I started thinking about this is why the ticks are biting me, and it's not the truth. Matt calls me a tick magnet. I'm not a tick magnet. I find them on me because I know how to check myself. And it's a constant part of my my grooming, quite frankly. I mean, I check myself with ticks every morning after I get out of the shower, and I check myself with ticks every night before I get into my pajamas and go to bed, right? I mean, I just do it every single day. So yeah, I'm finding ticks on me at times, especially in, I live on Long Island in the spring and the fall, they're more likely to be on us. And I check my dog all the time, and I find ticks on her all the time, right? I mean, it's just a natural part of, my life. So I'm not a magnet, I'm just finding them. The rest of you who are not checking regularly are just not finding them, but they're biting you. It's real, right? You didn't get Lyme disease, from the air. You very, very likely got bitten by a tick, and you just didn't find it on you early enough, right? So that has to be another part of the maintenance part of your experience. You do not want to get reinfected, and many folks do find themselves reinfected, and then sort of having their lives kidnapped again, right? It's a really, really a difficult situation, right? So, Dr. Thompson, this has been great. I really enjoyed going through the PARM formula with you, and seeing how we sort of line up, our experiences with interviewing 500 folks and what has worked for folks seems to be very much in line with the way that you're treating the folks that you work with. So let's talk about the transformation that you've gone through in your life, right? Because there is the journey of achievement where you've ultimately been able to heal from this disease and get yourself into a good place physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially. But then, of course, as you're doing your work is working on you. That's why I always argue to folks, there's no such thing as wasted work, because even if it doesn't seem to be working yet, it's working on you and you are changing, right? Because this is a spiritual journey, right? This is a process of becoming a more pure version of yourself. This is a process of finding your purpose, right? And you went from being a jock and a professional athlete, or desiring to be a professional athlete, to being someone who works in the healing arena, right? You've become a healing professional. So talk to us about how your Lyme disease journey has caused you to have a better understanding of your purpose, and how you became a more pure version of yourself so that you can serve the world in a way that you would not have had you not gone on a Lyme disease journey.
Yeah, I always say I'm thankful for my journey because it led me to my purpose, and I am blessed in that I get to help people regain their health every single day. And my goal is that no one has to suffer as long as I did. If we can bring that time down and we can help people get well faster, that's the biggest like hope I have. And to be able to see people regain their health every single day is like what lights me up. And I'm excited to work and I love doing this. And so it's really like lit up my like really, really lit me up. And I'm so, so blessed that I've gone through this journey. Now I get to play tennis for fun. So it's kind of a cool thing. I get to play a sport I love, and I'm well enough that I played right before this podcast, I played 3 hours of tennis and get to work with people and watch them regain their lives. And you want to talk about like inspiring, it's watching people go from super sick to well again. It's the most amazing thing ever. So I am truly blessed. Would I go through that again? Probably not, but I did go through it and now I'm on the other side. And so I can take what I've learned and help other people. And they also still help me. I still learn things from clients and from other experts. I still stay up on it. And so it's a fun learning thing of always trying to expand our knowledge and grow. The community is amazing. The Lyme community is truly amazing. And it's through the dark times that you meet amazing people. It's some of my dearest friends I met through the Lyme community. So there's so many aspects that I'm like, so much of my life is built around, and to be able to help people is truly amazing. And it's really changed my perspective of like, I enjoy every day. I do things I love. I have a light in me that people are always like, you're so happy. And it's because I do what I love every single day. And I feel like people can see that. You can spot someone that loves what they do immediately. And so it's just given me so much joy in helping other people. I truly am thankful that I get to do this every day.
So in that spirit, why don't you share with our folks how they can get in touch with you? If there are folks who are listening to this podcast, who they themselves need to work with a practitioner, or they are listening for someone they love and they'd like to recommend that someone they love who's going on this journey to work with you, can you share with us how they can get in touch with you?
Yes, so social media, I have both TikTok and Instagram are Dr. Torrie Thompson. Only positive things on there, no negative, no scary things. And then my website is also drtorriethompson.com. And so, schedule a discovery call and let's see if I'm a good fit and I can help. And then, say hi on social media. I love hearing from you guys too.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson, for taking 2 hours out of your life to scale your brilliant protocols with the community. One of the things that I like to share with doctors is, first, I want to thank you for dedicating your career to this community. We need more people like you. I want to thank you for giving me hope, because during the early days of doing this podcast, it was very sad for me to interview folks who almost seem hopeless. But what's giving me the greatest hope, quite frankly, are the young people who have been on a Lyme journey who become doctors themselves. You folks are really making a huge difference. I also want to thank you for taking time to do a podcast like this and all the work you do on social media, because there's going to be a limit to the number of people that you're going to be able to touch directly. But by doing podcasts like this one, and by doing the work that you're doing on social media, what you're doing is you're scaling your brilliance and your healing methods. And I can't think of a more beautiful thing for someone to do. So thank you for all those reasons, for what you're doing in this community. And please stay in touch with us. Let us know what you're doing and how we can continue to help you get the word out to the folks who listen and follow to Tick Bootcamp.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you guys for this platform and doing what you do, because I wish I would have had this when I was going through my journey. This would have been a game changer. So the fact that you guys are doing this and continue to do this, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because as a former patient, this is what would have been a game changer for me.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Cassidy, as always, for being a brilliant co-host. You are wonderful, Cassidy, and thank you for everything you do as well.
Thanks for letting me be on this journey and getting to meet Dr. Thompson.